Welcome to the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. I'm Christian of Standing Stones Healing, founder of the Reiki Business Collective and creator of the Build Your Reiki Business program, sending blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business. Greetings, welcome, and thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. It's Christian, so honored and excited to welcome you, so thank you so very much. In this week's episode, we're talking about attunements. Attunements for your Reiki business? In your Reiki business? Just attunements. Over the years, I've gotten lots of questions about attunements. Specifically, I've gotten the most questions about why someone feels sick after an attunement and what to do about it. I'll talk about that. But in this episode, we'll talk all about attunements, because attunements are something that has come up again and again in my practice, in my mentoring, and there are always lots of questions about attunements and misconceptions as well. When we talk about attunement, it's important for us to talk about it in all of its different names. Of course, we know it most commonly as attunement. It's also called a placement or an initiation, depending upon the lineage. And of course, in the traditional system of Reiki, it's called Reiju. Now, I see these as different things. I'll talk about a little bit of the history in a moment, but I see Reiju and attunement or initiation or placement or whatever you might call it as different things. But an attunement, for those who are unaware, which probably if you're tuning into this podcast, you already are attuned to the word attune and what it is, but it is a ritual performed at each stage of the Reiki training process to, quote, open up the student to channel Reiki, the energy. Now, this is the belief. It's not necessarily the reality. During my trainings, I was taught that an attunement does indeed open up the student to channeling Reiki, that an attunement attunes the student to the frequency of Reiki, and that the teacher performing the attunement opens up or even simply widens that ability to channel. Now, over the years with my own learning, because our learning in Reiki is never done, and the training is simply the beginning of the learning, I've done a little bit more learning about attunements, a little bit more thinking about attunements. And actually, my thinking on attunements preceded my learning. What I mean by that is that as I reflected on Reiki, as I traveled my Reiki journey, as I realized that Reiki, the energy of all things Reiki, is always everywhere and in everything and all of us at all times, I realized that we are never separate from Reiki and that we always already are Reiki. And so if this is the case, then how can we be quote unquote attuned to something that we already are by someone else? So in other words, if we already are Reiki and we already have Reiki flowing through us, then how does an attunement, quote, open us up to channel something that we already are. So then I thought, oh, it just helps us to open up more. We can channel more, quote unquote, channel more Reiki through an attunement. But my Reiki journey continued to unfold. I continued to practice. I continued to reflect and thought, no, I don't think that's it either. Because it's not the attunement itself that determines whether we are practicing Reiki and to what extent we are practicing Reiki. So if it was the case that each attunement made us a better practitioner or more able to quote unquote channel quote unquote more Reiki or quote better Reiki, then a level 3 practitioner automatically would be a better practitioner than a level 1 practitioner, no matter what their practices were, no matter how closely they attempted to live the precepts, no matter how much or how little they recognized the oneness. So all of these realizations led me to learn what this attunement thing is really all about. Usui did not do attunements, quote unquote attunements, in the way in which they are now done in the Western teachings of Reiki. And Usui practiced Reiju. Reiju is a blessing, and it was a way for Usui to help students to recognize their oneness, their connection, their true Reiki nature. And it was incredibly simple. It was really an opportunity to sit with and in the energy, the oneness. But Usui found that his students had challenges with this idea of just sitting in the energy with the Reiju as a non-doing kind of practice and more of a being kind of practice. So he included hand positions performed on the person to make it more of a thing. When Reiki came to the West through Takata, she thought of the Reiju as an initiation, as a way to help the student to allow Reiki, the energy, to come out from within. And after Takata passed on, her students began calling that initiation the attunement. And so today, the attunement that we know in Western Reiki looks quite different from what it traditionally did when it was doing nothing. So now, with an attunement, we have a lot of doing, when traditionally the Reiju was a lot of not doing. Now, the Reiju as a blessing is something that is not done just once in training. With an attunement, we will attune students once or maybe 4 times. At level 1, I do 4 attunements. But the Reiju is not a once and done kind of thing. It is something that is practiced again and again and again in the traditional system of Reiki. So knowing now a little bit about the history of the Reiju, the attunement, the lineage of the attunement, if you will, perhaps we can see that the attunement maybe isn't as essential to the practice of Reiki as we might think it is. That, in other words, the attunement is not the end-all, be-all. At this point on my journey, I really view attunement as a ritual. Yes, it is a ritual. For those of us who offer attunements, we know it is highly ritualistic, but that the focus here is on the ritual, the act of ritual itself, not necessarily what we do, as in that we do it. Because we know that ritual is very powerful. Ritual is a message. Ritual sends a signal to the brain. Now, ancient cultures knew this. Very highly ritualistic cultures knew this. And we have science now to back it up, to say that yes, when we perform rituals, there is a change that takes place in the brain. And ritual is a powerful signal to ourselves, to the universe, that we are ready for change, that we are moving into a new phase, and we are doing so with intention. And so even though the attunement does not, quote, open us up to Reiki, because we're already open to Reiki, rather, the attunement is a way for us to remember who we are, to remember that we are the one, the great, bright, shining light, part of the oneness. I even hesitate to say part of the oneness because that suggests that there is separation if there is a part, but that all is one, and we are all and one. And so I do believe that the attunement in the Western lineage of Reiki is an important ritual, because we approach it with intention. The student approaches it. We as teachers approach it with intention. The student approaches it with intention. And it is a signal of commitment, of dedication, a message that claims, yes, I am Reiki. And so if the attunement isn't opening us up, isn't making us able to channel Reiki, then why is it that sometimes some students feel sick after an attunement? I get this question a lot. I feel sick after an attunement. Why do I feel sick? Is something wrong? And here's the truth, is that if an attunement does nothing, why do some students feel sick after an attunement? I don't know. I don't know. But what I do know is that ritual is very powerful. I used to tell students, and I used to believe, that it was because we are opening up to a higher level of energy, a higher vibration. That may be true, but it's not because of universal life force energy, which we already have flowing through us and in us. Rather, it may be because the student themselves is claiming a higher vibe life, a more aligned life, a more connected life. Coming back to who we are isn't easy. And if we are striving to live a life in greater alignment and resonance, that's going to have some bumps and challenges. And so if/when we have a student who feels sick after an attunement, that can happen. That does happen. And if this has happened to you or to your students, you didn't do anything wrong. The students didn't do anything wrong. I personally didn't feel any different after any of my attunements. Now, I enjoyed the attunements. They were very relaxing. I really felt the energy. I felt the connection. It felt great. And I did not have any kind of after effects that I could notice. But you're not doing anything wrong. Your students aren't. If you don't feel anything, it doesn't mean that the attunement didn't work. And so I want to encourage us that if this does happen after an attunement, whether we're the student or the teacher, it is all okay. And if it doesn't happen, it's all okay as well. But when I have a student who doesn't feel well after an attunement, I simply encourage them to practice self-Reiki. And of course, the 21-day cleanse of self-healing after the attunement includes self-Reiki, and I simply encourage them to adhere to that. Of course, grounding, breathing, other practices can also help with anything that might come up after an attunement, whether emotional, physical, or whatever it might be. Just as an aside, as always, if we have students or clients who are experiencing physical sickness after a session or an attunement, it's important always to rule out anything medical and to have them seek medical assistance and the advice of licensed professionals, medical or mental health, if any of their symptoms have not gone away in a couple of days. Because, of course, they may have nothing to do with Reiki at all. Another question I get is, how do I prepare for an attunement? And I like to encourage my students to prepare for an attunement with 21-day cleanse practices. Of course, they don't have to, but things like just simply being more mindful of our eating, the kind of content that we are consuming, the kinds of thoughts that we are having, those are important at any time. And I do encourage my students when they ask, what do I need to do to prepare, that they can consider some of those practices, a greater level of mindfulness, and setting the intention. But of course, there's nothing that a student has to do to prepare for an attunement. There's a lot to say about attunements, and Reiki too. But do you offer attunements? Do you teach Reiki and attune students? Do you offer Reiki? What are your thoughts on the whole attunement question? What do you tell students when they get sick after an attunement? Join us in the Reiki Business Collective Facebook group and tell us all about it at facebook.com/groups/Reiki Biz. Sending lots of blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business. Thanks for tuning in to the Build Your Reiki Business podcast. Please like, share, subscribe, and send to a friend. Learn more about the Build Your Reiki Business program at standingstoneshealing.com/build, sending blessings and best wishes to your Reiki business.